Do you love hiking, getting out in nature, exploring new places and want some inspiration? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Everyday Hiker podcast. My name is Beck and I'm your host. I live in the beautiful southeast Queensland region of Australia, so many of our hikes are based in this area, but we've also got some great travel inspiration for you, plus special guests, practical tips and guides to hiking that we can share with you. And if you like what you hear, please follow me, share with your friends, rate my podcast and send me your feedback. Okay, hello and welcome everyone. I recently hiked the Nakasendo Way in Japan in October 2025 and I loved it. It's not a technical hike as such, it's a walk. There's plenty of forests, mountains, valleys and rivers. And I did this as an independent traveller and organised my own transport, baggage relocation, accommodation and meals, etc. And I did it solo. Now, I'm a moderately experienced hiker and comfortable travelling by myself, but particularly in Japan, where I just feel that going as a solo traveller, you will be safe. And I know that there's a lot of interest in Japan at the moment. There's some pretty good flight deals, currency's good, so it's great value. And given that, I thought I would share with you my report on hiking the Nakasendo Way, the preparation I had to do beforehand, and what it was like once I got on the trail. So firstly, some history. The Nakasendo Way is an ancient trail that linked the old capital of Kyoto to the new capital of Edo, which we now know as Tokyo, during the Edo period, which was roughly early 1600s to the second half of the 1800s. The trail in its entirety is well over 500 kilometres in length, and there were 69 historical post towns along this route where travellers would rest and have a meal, but there were also checkpoints so they could see who was travelling on the trail. Today, much of that trail has been modernised and taken over by rail lines and roads and towns, and so while there are some people who will hike its whole 500 plus Ks in length, most people tend to focus on the part of it that is in the Kiso Valley and through the Kiso Mountains, and that is between Nagoya in the south and Matsumoto in the north. And several of the post towns in this section have been preserved and restored as the Japanese government has recognised their historical value. And visiting these towns and some of the old cobblestone paths that have also been restored just absolutely gives you a sense of history and the people that would have travelled here centuries before, including shoguns and samurai, priests and their families. So what I'm going to do today, this first episode is going to be dedicated to practical information, how I organised my trips, everything I did before I actually started walking. So the first thing that I guess most people want to know is when to go. And there's no doubt that spring, which is between March and May, and autumn or fall, as it's Northern Hemisphere, between September and November are the most popular times to walk the Nakasendo Way, and with good reason. I'll talk about those in a moment. So let's talk about winter, which is December to February. And the first thing to know is that this is an alpine region. You might experience some snow on the trails, but from all reports of what I've heard, it's not a particularly technical route with snow and ice. But the other thing that you need to consider is the transport. So the transport is going through mountains with snow and ice coming down from the rivers. And when we were in this region a couple of years ago, I did actually meet some people that got stuck on a train just south of Matsumoto and had to spend the night on it with no heating. So that's not fun. So there could be some challenges in winter from the fact that it's an alpine region. If you're very comfortable with that type of climate, then obviously it's going to be quieter at that time of the year. And I think it'll be pretty pretty with snow around as well. Now, summer is all about humidity. I was really surprised going in October. I've mostly been to Japan in winter before, just how humid the days were, particularly the further south I went, but even on this trail. So summer, I can imagine the humidity really ramps up, and if you're not comfortable with a tropical climate, that might be a reason not to visit during this period. Look, on the flip side, with summer, there are so many rivers and creeks and waterholes that you could swim in. I would think that would be one of the bonuses of going at that time. So I went in autumn because I was really keen, apart from the cooler weather and the mild sort of days, I was really keen to see some of the fall colours because it is a forested region. And certainly I did see that in places. Apparently the time to go if you're looking for those fall leaves is November more than October. But they were definitely out enough in the second half of October while I was there. In springtime, even in October, there were wildflowers. So I can just imagine in spring how beautiful they would be along the trail. The other thing I saw was cherry blossom trees, particularly in the temples. And that would just be another highlight of visiting in springtime. When I was there in the fall, the days were pleasantly warm and mostly dry. I had one day where there was very light rain and I had one day where it was pretty hot. So I think this is the kind of trail, unless you're going in that winter or summer period, that you probably want to pack for a number of conditions, and that'll get you that'll work the best for you when you're out on the trail. So where to start? As I said earlier, the most popular parts of the trail are between Nagoya and Matsumoto. Now, both of these towns are really well serviced by the Shinkansen, or the bullet trains, from Tokyo. So they're both about 2 hours travel from Tokyo. So it doesn't really matter if you're starting from Tokyo which direction you start in. I flew into Osaka, and it took me a while longer then because I had to get from Osaka up to Nagoya, which was 2.5 hours, and another couple of hours to get up to Matsumoto. So if you're just coming for this trail, then it would make sense to fly in to Tokyo. If, like me, you wanted to keep going and head south, then Osaka is definitely doable. You just have to plan for a little bit of extra time. Now, I did choose to walk the route north to south. The more popular way seems to be south to north, and I think this is a lot about the most popular section of the trail is Magami to Sumago, and walking in that direction, a lot of it's downhill. So obviously if you flip it the other way, which is what I did, it's a mostly uphill day. I think if you're walking the whole trail, it doesn't matter as much which direction you're going in. Just do the direction that suits you. And the reason being is that on any given day, what was uphill yesterday becomes downhill for you now, and vice versa. So just pick the town that you want to start at. So how to get there? I wait until I get to Japan to book train tickets, and certainly I had no trouble booking these in Osaka to get up to Nagoya and on to Matsumoto. If you are the sort of person that you want to know that your train times are locked in advance, one option you might consider is using an app called Klook. The advantage of using Klook is that it will show you prices and you can pay in your own currency. The disadvantage, though, is that it's only the major train routes, and I found they didn't show all available options, so just the big ones. But if you wanted to lock in that very first train trip, maybe think about Klook. You can also use Japanese Rail or JR, but you've got to pay in yen, buying those tickets overseas. When you get there and you book your tickets, I like to go into the ticket office, and the reason I do is I find that they're really helpful with information. They'll tell you, the next train leaves in 5 minutes, but it's going to take you at least that time to get to the platform, because some of these stations are huge, and finding the platforms, and like the Shinkansen's in a different area to the local trains, can be a bit confusing. So you can ask them, what's a reasonable time that I need to leave to get to this train, so that you don't put yourself under stress. They'll also help you with things like picking a reserved seat, and I definitely suggest that. It's on those intercity routes because they're busy. One of them even told me which was the best side of the train to sit on. But the other thing is you can ask them about the next day too. So, where would be best to buy tickets to get to this destination? So I like to go into the ticket office. You can, without a doubt, book through the ticket machines because they have an English button. So click that straight away and it'll talk you through it, and you can buy a reserved seat and all sorts of things using the ticket machine. Now, one thing I will warn you of, even in the ticket offices, not all of them accepted PayWave, which we've got very used to in Australia. I'm sure some other countries have as well. You needed a card with a chip in it that you could insert. Now, most of them have that, but that's just a warning for you. Or you're going to need cash. And let's go on to cash, because cash can be a bit challenging to find in Japan unless you know where to head. I have never taken cash with me. I've always got cash when I arrive in Japan. And the reason being, the best place to get cash is the 7-Elevens, and they are on every second street corner in the major cities. So what you'll find is sometimes when you rock up to the other ATMs, they don't take foreign cards. So you need to, or your best bet is to go to the 7-Eleven, or there's a supermarket called Lawson's, one of those, and use the ATMs in there. The other thing that I did run across this time, and I've certainly run across it before elsewhere, is that it might ask you, do you want to take that money out in your own currency or in Japanese yen? If you put your own currency, like do you want that to be calculated in your own currency, their calculation, you'll find their exchange rate is often not as favourable as you would get from your bank. So I would suggest opting for Japanese yen and let your bank do the currency conversion. Now, finding the ATMs really isn't that difficult, but of course you could take a handful of cash with you when you go. And to give you an idea of what my train and transport costs were for this part of the trip, I spent less than 200 Australian dollars, which is roughly 130 US dollars, on train and bus tickets from Nagoya to Matsumoto and everywhere in between. So that'll give you an idea of what kind of cash or allowance you might need for train tickets. When it comes to cash in the towns and the villages for other items, once again, I spent less than $300 Australian cash, which is about 200 US dollars along the way. And that included a night at one of the guests' house. So it's pretty cheap. You really only need cash for small items. So 500 Australian dollars, depends on how long you're travelling elsewhere, might be something that would be good to have on you. Now, what to take? As I said earlier, I did experience a bit of Four Seasons along the way in October, and I did take everything then to account for that. I started in my trip in Matsumoto, as I said earlier, and one of the reasons I did that, and one of the great things for doing that, is the hotel that I stayed at would organise the transport of my bigger bag, my travel bag, from Matsumoto to Nagoya, the hotel where I had booked into in Nagoya, via Yamato luggage service. And a medium-sized backpack, I think it's about 65 litres, was 25 Australian dollars to send from Matsumoto to Nagoya. So that's roughly 16, 17 US dollars. And I simply left it with the hotel desk. I had to fill out a form saying where it was going. And really importantly, I had to pay cash. So that's another reason why you need to get your cash. They don't take credit cards. Then I left it with them. And the next thing you know, I turn up at Nagoya and there's my bag. If your hotel doesn't offer that luggage service, I noticed that there was a Yamato office, or it must have been an agent, in both Matsumoto and Nagoya, so you could pop into those offices to organise that service. I was really glad I did this once I got onto the trail, because firstly it allowed me to travel with quite a small backpack. I think mine was 35 litres, which was more than enough. I probably could have taken a smaller one. And I was walking for 4 days. Now, I'm going to put this packing list on the show notes for this episode so that you can have a copy of it. But to give you an idea, I kept things really simple. I took 2 sets of complete hiking clothes. That is a t-shirt, a long sleeve top, a pair of convertible pants. There was one day where it was hot enough to wear shorts, and I appreciated that. And 2 pairs of underwear, hiking socks. Obviously, I wore one on the first day, and then I carried a fresh one for 2 days later. I also took a puffer vest that folds down really small and a rain jacket. Same thing, very compact. You might need a warmer jacket depending on the time of the year you are going on, but I one day it was 11 degrees Celsius, and I was warm enough by the time I had that 4-layer system on. Obviously, you need a hat or a cap. There are some exposed sections where you're walking, particularly on the local roads, and you'll want a hat for those, so your choice of hat. And when it comes to hiking boots, I only wore trail shoes. I wanted ones that I could walk in all day, and were also lightweight. I just don't think you needed boots. If you were worried about ankle stability on some of the hills, then maybe consider hiking poles, which I definitely took. I have some really light packable hiking poles, so they were really good to throw in my backpack when I didn't want to use them. I also took a second pair of shoes, just a pair of slides, and some really lightweight extra pair of socks, because then I could walk around in these at night when I was in the villages. Although I will add that many of the guest houses provide slides, so it's just that, whether you want to wear them outside or not. This was a little trick that I often do. I took a pair of really plain pyjamas, they're navy, and I used those as my lightweight pants that I would put on at night to have dinner in. I don't think anybody could really tell that they were pyjama pants. Just throwing them on with a hiking shirt and a vest and my slides, I could definitely get away with that. Some of the guest houses will provide pyjamas and robes to wear at dinner. It's just whether you're comfortable wanting to go outside, even later in the afternoon when you might have had a bath and you wanted to put something lightweight and fresh on. I like taking a bladder in my pack for drinking water, and I wanted to say here that it was really easy to find water to refill this bladder every morning, and in fact on the hot day I actually bought an extra bottle of water. So you're buying the bottled water very, very cheap. You buy it at shops, but there's also vending machines at the train stations, the bus stations, actually even sometimes in the town themselves there'll be a vending machine on the side of the road, and it's super cold and it's fantastic. I didn't take any food. If you had dietary requirements, you might want to, but I just found there were plenty of places to buy things along the way. I'd be careful with the restaurants. They weren't always open, or they didn't appear to be open. Sometimes you can't tell with the curtain. There are people behind there. So you might want to book restaurants in advance if you're going to be coming in later in the day, or even if it's a really small town. Even like at Magome, there's limited restaurants there. You might want to throw a packet of 3-minute noodles in as a backup for dinner, because there was plenty of hot water available. I'm a tea drinker, so I did also take a couple of tea bags and some UHT milk in case I needed to make myself a cup of tea in the morning before I got going. And then I just took a phone, a charger, and within my phone I had an ebook and a video downloaded to keep me entertained if I needed it. I will mention that I used an Esim from Airalo, and I got coverage pretty much everywhere. I can't think of when I didn't get coverage. They're incredibly cheap, the plans that they have for Japan. I found them really easy to activate. In fact, it was like 2 steps when I was in Osaka airport using their free Wi-Fi. If you don't have time coming through the airport to activate your eSIM, the big buses and trains have Wi-Fi on board as well, and you could do it then. I have got a discount code for Aralo, so I'll put that on the show notes if you want that. It gives you roughly $5 Australian or $3 off your plan. Coin purse, something that I know in Australia I don't use coins very often, so I don't necessarily travel with one. You will need to on this trip. Like I said, you need coins and cash for some of the local trains, temple entries, buses, that sort of thing, and you end up carrying, a big handful of coins around, so you want a little purse or a container that you can put it in. When it comes to bathroom items, I really only took travel size, and the reason was that in every guest house or hotel, they always seem to provide the basics of shampoo and washers and towels and even things like combs and toothbrushes. So you might just want to have things like deodorant and toothpaste and kind of back up travel size ones. And another tip I would suggest is take some small plastic bags like Ziploc bags or something, because you will collect rubbish along the way and it's really hard to find a bin. But they're also great for putting wet or dirty clothes in. I estimate that my backpack weighed around 7 to 8 kilos, so it was really comfortable to carry, and that included the water allowance. And it was just so liberating having this light pack on my back, but also not worrying about having, did my suitcase arrive with my spare set of clothes? And when you've only got 2 sets of clothes, there's not much choice. You know what you're wearing each day. So I would definitely encourage you to think about just travelling with a really light pack and forgetting trying to organise, your suitcase along the way if you think you can manage it. Now, in the next episode, I'm going to go into a detail of the itinerary that I've followed, but at a very high level, this is what I did. On day 1, I went from Matsumoto to ending up in Kiso, Fukushima, but I did the Yabuhara to Narai Trail on that day along the way. Day 2, I was around the Kiso, Fukushima area, and I went down to Agamatsu. On day 3, I left Kiso, Fukushima and went to Magumi, and I sort of jumped off the train at Nagiso to get down there, and then on day 4, I went to Magumi to Nakatsugawa, which is where I could then catch the train on to Nagoya. If I had one more day, I probably would have added in an extra day on day 3 to go from Nojuri to Nagiso and stayed the night in Nagiso. It's a bit harder to get accommodation here, which is one of the reasons I skipped it. It is a 15-kilometre walk, so it's one of the longer walks, but by all accounts, it's a really pretty day. So if I had my time again, I would have made it 5 days and added that in. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do when you decide when you're going and you've booked your flights is to book accommodation. So I mentioned that itinerary because mapping out what parts of the walk you'd like to do is really important so you can work out where you want to stop each night. And the first thing I did was jump on booking.com. This seems to be the accepted accommodation provider for hotels and guest houses along the way, but not all of them. In fact, not a lot of the guest houses. So one of the problems with relying on booking.com is you will have a really limited choice. But I put my hands on accommodation for the 3 nights straight away so that I knew at least I had some accommodation, even if it wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be or where I wanted to stay. And I did that about 4 months before my trip, and I was okay booking on that time frame. The tourist offices are probably the best source of booking the guest houses or finding alternative accommodation, and I found them incredibly helpful along the way. So the guest houses, or ryokans as they're called, you might want to specifically stay there for an onsen, for example, or for a local experience, or for the meal plans that they offer. The tourist offices, from what I hear, don't reply quickly in cases, so it could take a month or more before you get a reply. And so you don't want to be stressed about, have I got accommodation booked, which is why I'm suggesting looking at booking.com. I couldn't get my guest house of choice in Magome, so what I did is I kept checking back and eventually I got it. So that would be my other tip, is keep having a look around. Now, with the guest houses, whilst it's a fantastic experience and I absolutely recommend that you stay at least one night in one, the thing that you have to recognise is that they have Japanese bedding options, which are essentially futons, which are mattresses on mat floors. And I wouldn't call them mattresses in the sense that we know, the double springed or memory foam, high sort of mattresses, super comfortable. They're flatter and they are comfortable, but not, in my experience, for the whole night. And it takes some time to adjust if you're used to this really super springy mattress and now you're sleeping on a more hard mattress on a floor. So my preference is to try and find a Western bed to balance that out, and they might be harder to find. So if it's important to you to have a Western bed or vice versa, you're trying to get a particular ryokan, they're the ones you really want to book in advance. The other thing about the guest houses is that they often won't have en-suites. So they'll have a shared bathroom. And look, their bathrooms are meticulously clean. In the ones I stayed at, I found there was heaps of sinks and toilets that you could use that obviously are private. It's just that when it comes to bathing and showering, you might be in a shared open room. So if you're looking for an ensuite, it will be even tougher to find accommodation and you need to book in advance. I think the onsens and the hot baths that are on offer in these hotels are really just fantastic. Don't miss them if you can. The other thing is the meal plans where I stayed were wonderful, and it's just a great and a safe way to try Japanese food because they'll tell you what's on the tray. Usually you don't get too much choice, but here's a tray of food and go for it and try it. So it's definitely part of the experience. One thing I did find is there wasn't too much Western food on the trail, not like the cities. I mean, my go-to for Western food is karaage chicken or the fried chicken. I didn't even see that along the way, so plenty of noodles. But if you've got very particular dietary requirements, you're going to need to check in advance as well with a guest house, whether they'll be able to meet those. Now, in terms of walking difficulty, I would say the sections that I walked on the Nakasendo Way would be rated easy to moderate, and probably the moderate would just be the occasional steep hill and the length of the trails. There was no technical difficulty, and probably if that humidity is higher, the longer walking all day might make it a bit more challenging. I took it really easy. I think that at the most I walked 12 kilometres in a day, and at the least about 6 kilometres. I wanted to wander and take little detours and sit and enjoy the scenery and pop down an alleyway, and I wasn't worried about it taking me all day. So I certainly wasn't trying to race from one place to the other, and I would definitely suggest that's the best way to experience the Nakasendo Way. Now, I have to mention bears because I know that on the forums, that's the thing that people are most worried about. There are black bears in the woods on this trail, and I didn't see any, and I didn't see any evidence of them, but there are, you just definitely need to be aware of them, and there are things you can do to make you a bit more comfortable with it. So firstly, a lot of people do the day trip, which is Margami to Sumago. There's a lot of people on that on most days, and I think you would be very unlucky to see a bear on that section because there's so many people, and that really is the best defence, making a lot of noise as you're going along. Also, all the way along the trails, there are these large bell bears that you can ring, and, you know, I rang them every time I walked past one. Half of it, I think, was novelty. The other half was just in case there was a bear listening, wanted to let him know I was on my way. And many hikers also take their own bear bells. Now, these aren't special, you don't find a bear bell as such. They're just small bells on a key ring that you can put on your backpack. So you can get one from home. Might be better than having to look around when you get there for a bell. It took me a day or two to find one that was suitable, and they sort of jingle jangle as you're going along, which actually can be annoying at times, but that is another sort of defence, letting the bear know you're coming, because these black bears are shy by all accounts, and they won't approach you. They would much prefer to rush off into the undergrowth before you come through. It's only if you stumble across them, is all the advice that you are given, that you might surprise them and they might defensively sort of, rear up. So the other thing that I was told is that talking loudly or making noise like music is probably a better defence than those little bear bells. So there was one section where I thought, wow, it's a bit remote and it's quite deeply forested here. And I just put some music on and had a bit of a sing-along because there was no one else around. So that's, the best advice that I can give about bears. You're definitely not supposed to run away from them. You need to stand still, act tall. But just remember, this is not the brown bears that we're hearing on the news at the moment in Hokkaido, which have been responsible for a number of deaths. Now, I think that's covered up all the practical stuff that you need to know, things to take and things to prepare for before you get out on the Nakasendo Way. Like I said, in the next episode, I am going to take you through day by day the itinerary I followed to give you an idea of what to expect. So thank you for listening. I look forward to talking to you again in episode 2.